Minister of State at the Department of the Climate, Energy and Environment, Timmy Dooley. Timmy, we're here for the second annual Energising Clare conference organised by Ennis Chamber. Of course, look, we're 1 year on from the last one. The focus is still very much on Clare's offshore wind energy potential. We now have a designated maritime area plan in the works, at least. Are we any closer? Have we made any progress on this stage last year?
Yeah, well, very significant progress. And first of all, to thank Margaret and the team here at the Ennis Chamber for continuing the effort to bring people together on an annual basis to discuss the progress, identify what hasn't maybe happened in the intervening period, and to plan ahead for the year. So the really important thing, I suppose, that has happened since last year is that work has now started on identifying zones in and around our coastline that will be suitable for offshore wind. Part of that will be to identify 1 or 2 sites for floating offshore, which is the big potential from a County Clare perspective. Work is underway and we expect to have that completed by the end of 2027. It's a very detailed project in terms of sea mapping, identifying the best locations, and then engaging with local communities who would potentially have an input into where the electricity would be brought ashore, etc. So there's a whole consultation period. So by the end of 27, we hope to have the entirety of the coastline of Ireland in our sea areas mapped in a manner that can identify, or that will identify, zones that are suitable for the generation of offshore renewable electricity, up to 20 gigawatts of electricity by 2040. So that's a huge amount of electricity. It opens up very significant opportunities that we've discussed before, that will see Moneypoint become a green energy park. It will be the central point for bringing electricity ashore. There's opportunities there then to create hydrogen or transfer electricity into hydrogen when it's not being used on the grid, and potentially into ammonia as well. And all of that then feeds into the potential to have developments around sustainable aviation fuel, which is really important in the Midwest region. So there's still so many opportunities, and we're a year closer to delivering on that. And very significant work has taken place on that DMAP process in between. You'll be hearing today, I'm sure too, from Foynes Port. They continue their work towards being ready to accommodate the large vessels and the flotation of these very large turbines that will ultimately be floated out into the Atlantic. So it's a lot of work. It'll take a good number of years, but they've started the work on that. The ESB are here today as well. They have very significant plans for the redevelopment of Moneypoint. As you know, they moved away from burning coal towards the middle of last year, and they have a very exciting plans around bringing that electricity ashore, but also having battery storage on site, and developing that whole area into an energy park where potential large energy users would locate either close to or on the site. And they'll have a significant planning application going to the state very shortly, that will again show how much they have progressed in the last year. So a lot of progress over the last year. Lots of work still to be done, but the future is bright for County Clare and for Ireland, for bringing renewable energy from our oceans ashore to electrify both the Irish growing need, but also with the potential to export through some of the grid infrastructure and interconnectors that are there with Europe and the UK, and also the potential to export hydrogen as well.
And I know we can talk a lot about these opportunities, and we've been hearing about them for some time. For example, with the Shannon Estuary Economic Task Force back in 2023. People will be very conscious the Scourge Rocks project fell through. We've previously had developers in the past pulling out because they said that the Irish system was far too slow. So I suppose people will be listening to this then, they'll be wondering, what evidence can we actually point to? What has happened in the last year that shows we're any closer to achieving this today, or even meeting our targets by the end of the decade?
So very significantly, we've moved away from where the developer-led projects were really the projects in town. The Scared Rocks is one of those, where a developer went and identified a site themselves and then had to go through a detailed planning process. Sometimes maybe identifying sites that ultimately weren't suitable. What the state is now doing through the DMAP process, it's putting all its weight and effort behind identifying the most suitable sites. One of those has already been done down off the southeast coast of Ireland, and there are 4 locations within that overall DMAP area that have been identified as suitable for the generation of electricity. The first one of those sites, the Tonua site, went to auction last December. There were 4 bidders, and there's a successful bidder now identified at a very good price.
That essentially is going out for tenders.
That went out to tender, in the bid process. A successful tenderer from the 4 was identified, and they now begin the detailed work of seeking the various different permissions that are needed. And they expect to be in the water by 2030, but more likely generating electricity by 2031, 2032. By the nature of these projects, are slow to deliver. There's a huge amount of work, and that's why we've got to start. We've to start now and continue to develop towards 2040. So that's real success in terms of what happened with that DMAP process. And I was very clear when I was appointed that we had to speed up the DMAP process. And when I was appointed, the plan was that we would do a DMAP along the Cork coast and then along Kerry and ultimately make our way up the west coast. And I felt that was too slow. So we've changed the policy in relation to that, and we're going to do an all of Ireland DMAP at the same time. And that work is now underway and will be delivered by 2027. That will identify the sites best suited to do a demonstrator floating offshore project. And work will begin on that on beyond 2027. So very real progress. Yes, some slow activity at the start, particularly along the east coast and the Scared Rocks one that you mentioned, off the Connemara coast, out towards the Aran Islands. But by the state now doing the planning, identifying the locations and offering them to the marketplace to bid for through an auction process, I think shows the real determination and a much simpler way to access. And what we're also doing, we're investing significantly in the surveys of the seabed in advance so that the bidders have all that data available to them when they're making the bid. So we're taking away some of the uncertainty, which was part of the Phase 1 projects, the Scared Rocks ones. There's a number of other ones on the East Coast as well, that were really just opportunities identified by developers, and they had to start from scratch without any state support. A number of years ago, we recognised the demand that we had ahead, the amount of electricity that we had to generate, that process was too slow. So the state had to take charge of the enabling works, if you want, by doing those surveys, identifying the most suitable locations, and then creating that competitive process that developers would bid for the opportunity to deliver. And as I said, the first wave of that was the 900 megawatts project, which was bid in December. Successful bidder came through, which is a combination of Ørsted and DSB, and they're now, as I said, beginning the next phase of that, and it's really exciting. And now there are 3 other potential bids there as well, which will be going to the marketplace over the course of the next year or 2. There's some grid works to be done and planned in that, and by the time that work's completed and the bid processes are completed, we'll have the DMAP for the rest of the country done, and be ready to offer more opportunities to the marketplace.
Wind Energy Ireland CEO Noel Caniff. Noel, we're at the 2nd annual Energising Clare conference. We were here a year ago. What progress have we made in the last year?
Yeah, so it's great to be here again, and thanks to Ennis Chamber for putting on the event. It's fantastic to be in a county like Clare, which has such a rich history of energy in Ireland, with Ardnacrush and then Moneypoint, and now moving in towards wind energy. We are making some progress. There's more onshore wind energy now in construction in Ireland than there has been in the last 6 years. Last year we got a lot more projects through the planning system, and we're hopeful that many of those will connect on by 2030. We have about a third of Ireland's electricity coming from wind energy at the moment, and over the next few years we're hoping to get that up to beyond 50%. In the more longer term, offshore wind remains a huge opportunity for Ireland. So we now have 5 projects in the planning system here in Ireland. That's something that we didn't quite have last year, and we're seeing more progress being made on them. We're hoping for the first decision to come out towards the end of the summer.
Clearly, as we can see by the importance by this, you've got a huge crowd in attendance today. You've got roughly 140 or above attendance. What you're due to present to them fairly soon. What's going to be in your presentation today?
So I'm going to be giving an overview of where the wind energy sector is at the moment and why it's so important. We heard just this week how Ireland needs more generation capacity. We need more electricity supply. Our demand, our population is growing. More customers are joining into the grid every day of the week, be it homes or businesses. So we need to keep connecting supply. And when you have older generation, like the coal plants, like the peat plants starting to come off, that needs to be replaced with renewable energy. So I'm going to be giving a status update on that, and then talking through some of the benefits that we'll see in the coming years in terms of jobs and communities around Ireland from that.
And I know it's something that Wind Energy Ireland generally does keep to hand. Do we have any idea what percentage of Ireland's, I suppose, renewable electricity was generated in Clare last year?
Yes, I think we're getting very close to about 5% of Ireland's renewable electricity coming from Clare. And that's just part of the benefits. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be publishing an updated version of our County Colours dashboard on our website. And that's going to show that last year, wind energy contributed €3.6 million in commercial rates to Clare County Council. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of euro of community benefit funds from the existing wind farms in Clare already as well.
Obviously, the big potential and the big goal is offshore wind energy, because that's going to blow anything onshore out of the water. But is it happening fast enough?
Nice pun. Is it happening fast enough? Absolutely not. So I mentioned earlier the 5 projects which are in planning at the moment. We're hoping to get those into construction by 2030. But then after that, when you're talking about the west coast and the deeper waters there, we're starting to go into floating offshore wind energy. So Minister Dooley at the moment is leading a piece of work called the National DMAP that will designate certain areas around Ireland for future offshore wind energy potential. We're hoping that designation will be concluded next year, and then that'll set a path and a timeline for how we can get some offshore wind farms off the coast of Clare in the future.
So Sean Hagerty, ESB's strategic stakeholder lead, what can you tell us about the state of offshore wind developments in Clare? Are we moving closer? Have we made progress in the last year?
Yes, I think the government have been really supportive in rolling out offshore wind from nowhere, from a standing start, I suppose, have stood up an organisation for both consenting and then regulation of an offshore wind industry. We've, together with our partners, secured a place in the phase 2 auction off the south coast last year. The east coast projects are moving ahead. So yes, absolutely, we're now, for the west coast, we're waiting for the national DMAP, as it's called, where the whole coast of Ireland is going to be opened up for offshore wind development. So for sure, it's coming, but it's an enormous task, and that's been moving now for the past few years, and I expect we'll see progress soon to allow us to move on the west coast.